Hurricane Irma is nowhere near done. The tropical storm has now battered Cuba and the Bahamas. It is now reduced to a Category 3 storm in strength. Irma has also prompted authorities in the United States to order a quarter of Florida's population to leave. Take a look at that map there. It is almost as big as the state of Florida, one of the most powerful storms to form in the Atlantic. Now, meteorologists have already reported that the damaging winds are blowing into South Florida as Irma quickly approaches Miami, the U.S. mainland. This as the eye of the storm moved over the north coast of Cuba early Saturday morning. Its circulation was disrupted by some of the landmass, so it came down from a Category 5 to a Category 4, but still the winds were pretty tough, 130 miles an hour. Now, on Friday night, Irma regained strength again to a Category 5, so still oscillating, intensity of 160 mile per hour winds before making landfall in Cuba. Again, becoming the first Category 5 hurricane to make landfall in Cuba since 1924. So far, the death toll for Irma, 23 people have died across the Caribbean. Now, residents in Orlando, this is in the central part, have now formed long lines in cars to get sandbags in preparation for the arrival of Irma. Many of them also taking the interstate and moving to nearby states like Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, where the hotels are also quickly getting booked up. Some airports there may also close. Irma is expected to hit the state of Florida Sunday. The governor there, Rick Scott, has warned residents to leave if they were in the evacuation zone, saying that if you do not leave now, it'll be hard to come and rescue you. Now, according to the External Affairs Ministry, India's missions are also closely monitoring the situation there for the areas in the island nations, as well as the impacts where Irma will touch landfall. They've also issued emergency numbers for the Indian diaspora affected by Irma in the territories of France, Netherlands, and Venezuela, those islands in the Caribbean that were impacted by Irma just a few days back. Now, let's take a look at some of these satellite images released by NASA. There you have it. These show not just Irma, but in fact 3 hurricanes barreling that area. This is the first time since 2010 that all 3 of these active hurricanes are going through around the same time, simultaneously throughout the Atlantic. This as Hurricane Irma makes its way towards Florida. There are 2 others gaining momentum and strength as they approach land. Hurricane Jose is an extremely dangerous Category 4 storm with maximum winds of 150 miles an hour. It is still forecast to steer north, potentially avoiding any impact to Florida. No word yet on how that will continue moving. All right, let's get our guests to discuss this story. It is brewing there, everybody on close edge watching to find out what is going to happen with Hurricane Irma. All right, to get perspective on the story, we have Professor Jeffrey Cargill from Phoenix, Arizona. We also have someone who tracks climate change and an international affairs expert, Stephen Golo from San Francisco. And we have an executive producer, journalist from Jacksonville, Florida, Hitul Gandhi. Thank you all for joining us. We know it is during the day there. Hasn't hit just yet, but let me start with Stephen. Stephen, quite scary over there in the United States, dealing with not just 1, but 3. But firstly, let's talk about Irma. What is happening there in the United States in terms of preparation? Are people really taking these evacuations seriously?
Oh, yeah. From everything we're seeing and reading here, definitely the governor of the state has issued, and other local leaders have urged people to evacuate. There have been reports of some people just standing pat, maybe even risking their lives to do so, but there have been preparations. There are evacuations. At the same time, not everyone is taking it as seriously as they should.
All right, let me bring in Jeffrey as well to the conversation. Now, we're just hearing that the Florida is asking around 700,000 people there, the governor there, to leave ahead of Hurricane Irma. Nearly 7 million people totally asked to leave. Now, just recently, of course, we saw what happened in Houston and Texas with the devastation of Hurricane Harvey. So many people almost got like a premonition, seeing the devastation of what happened. Do you think because of that, people are taking this one a little bit more seriously, Jeffrey?
Well, I'm not in the immediate area, but from what I'm picking up in the news media, yes, people are taking this very seriously. There were some very notable exceptions. I saw some people interviewed on CNN yesterday. They were planning to stay in their small boats in a harbor, which is absolutely absurd. But I think for the most part, people are taking it very, very seriously.
All right, let me bring in Heathal Gandhi back into the conversation. Heathal, thanks for joining us. We know you are at work. We apologize for taking you away, but we want to get some perspective on what is it like there in Florida. You are there in the path of Hurricane Irma, or what could be the path. We know it's going to hit Miami sometime Sunday, tomorrow. But right now in Jacksonville, Florida, what is it like? Give us a sense of the level of preparation or what people are saying when it comes to Hurricane Irma.
Well, I'll be going to work a little bit later today. So right now I'm kind of with my neighbors getting ready for the storm. And if you take a look outside here, I'm going to try to turn the camera around so you can look at the river. This is where I live. And if you look at how high that water's already come up, you can probably hear the wind out here. This has nothing to do with Irma. This is actually just a regular nor'easter that's off the coast. And you can see how high up that water is, and this is just the river. This isn't even the ocean. So all around us, we have that water, and folks here are really worried about that because they're worried about the storm surge, that water coming up and, of course, flooding their houses. But then they're also worried about the heavy winds. You can see we're surrounded by trees around us here, and that's also a huge issue. The family over here, this is actually a mandatory evacuation zone. This family hasn't left. It's kind of crazy here. I just want to show you. This area here is all a mandatory evacuation zone. But when you go down the street, on the other side of that street, those folks don't have to evacuate. So a lot of people here in the Jacksonville area are sticking around. This storm has been different because unlike some of the other storms, people are heeding the warnings. We had a hurricane here last year, Matthew, and a lot of people felt like since they stayed for that storm, they could stay for this one. But as you've seen from the models, this is bigger than the entire state. So it doesn't matter if it's coming up Tampa or if it's coming through Miami, it's going to affect everybody here. And even though we are 300 miles north of Tampa and Miami, we're still going to feel the effects here. As I said, it's already pretty windy here now. So I think people who have waited to get anything prepared, they're already making sure they've got those last minute preps underway. But fortunately, this time people started preparing a lot earlier, and I think a lot of people did get out of town.
Heathal, very compelling visuals there. Just to take a look at what is happening in Jacksonville, Florida, where, as you mentioned, the eye of the storm is still not hit Florida just yet, but you can still see how big it is in size. I mean, the last time I think something like this happened, a Category 5, was back in 1992, if I'm not mistaken, Hurricane Andrew, which completely battered Florida. So let me go back to you, Heathal, again. Florida is not prone. This is something that many people in Florida, Floridians, are used to hurricanes, but this one a little different. This one is so powerful, it's so big. We saw the effects of what happened in the Caribbean, what happened in Cuba and Puerto Rico, airports there. What is happening on the ground? There are people going to stores. Are they stocking up? Are they braving the storm? Or are they packing their bags and heading out to nearby states like Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina? In fact, I spoke to some people in Atlanta, and they said the hotels in Atlanta are full, which is quite surprising.
Yes, the Atlanta hotels are really full. It's so funny. I think they were giving away tickets to the baseball game there, I think, if you actually, or the football game, if you actually made it up there, because there were so many people that were evacuating from this area. I will tell you, I worked in Miami and Tampa as well. I'm really worried about Tampa. Tampa floods even during a regular thunderstorm. So this is going to be a really bad flooding event for places like Tampa, Naples, and Fort Myers on the West Coast. I'm also worried for Miami. I was telling my friends in South Florida to get out starting on Monday. A lot of them waited, tried to book flights, and now they can't get up here because the flights were canceled. But a lot of people hit the roads, and there was a lot of traffic, but they sat through the traffic. They went ahead and got out. Right now, the roads aren't that busy. In fact, I can maybe show you, I'm not sure how good of a shot you'll be able to see from here, but if I flip the camera around, there is a bridge off into the distance, and there's very little traffic there's very, very little traffic on the roads right now. But these bridges are a big concern for us here in Jacksonville. When the heavy winds pick up, when it gets over 40 miles per hour here, these bridges will shut down. And a city like Jacksonville is the city of 7 bridges. So when those bridges shut down, people have no way of getting around. And so that's kind of the major concern here. The other concern is that we're kind of on what's called the dirty side of the storm. So a lot of people think, oh, well, it's great. You're not going to get it coming right off of the East Coast and hitting you in Jacksonville. But when you're on the other side of the storm, the risk is tornadoes, and that's even harder because you can't predict those tornadoes. So that's kind of one of the things that we struggle with in our area right now, and that's what a lot of folks here are kind of concerned with right now.
All right, Heather, we'll come back to you. Those are great visuals there. We certainly wish you are safe, and we know it's not hit just yet, but certainly as the hours tick by and as you have to head into work to report this information for your viewers there in Florida, let me bring in Stephen Cola back into the conversation. Stephen, in fact, the governor of Florida just moments ago has again reminded people of Florida saying, quote, every Floridian and visitor should stay safe and prepare for Hurricane Irma. Take a look at some of those images there from the satellite images from NASA. Every Floridian in an evacuation zone needs to leave. I'm giving another update on Hurricane Irma. So it seems like he's really pushing for people to get out and leave. The reason for this is that the mayor of Houston not too long ago when Harvey happened got some criticism saying that not enough was done to evacuate people. But when it's Irma's case, a little different because they've had days to prepare. So plenty of people have the option to fly out or drive out of there. In terms of the preparedness, do you feel like the U.S. government, the governor there, has done enough to make sure people are warned and people have enough time to get out if they can? Stephen.
A big yes and a big no. The governor and other officials have given people lots of notice, partly because there was much more notice for Irma than there was for Harvey, the hurricane that kind of emerged and hit Houston and Texas not that long ago. So they've done a good job in that respect. The reason I'm saying no is that I feel almost a responsibility to note that this same governor has been really deficient in his responsibility about acknowledging climate change. He's been a real climate change denier or ignorer of the issue, and that does ultimately affect his state. So in terms of the long term of what he could be doing responsibly, no, he's really been horrible on this issue. In terms of the short-term immediate response, yes, he and other officials have done apparently a good job of warning people. The national government does have an experienced official in charge of FEMA, our national agency that deals with emergencies such as this. So it seems as though the immediate preparations and warnings have been good.
All right, let me bring in Jeffrey back into the conversation as well. Jeffrey, just to bring a quick update, U.S. President Donald Trump just moments ago, in fact, tweeting, telling people that to visit floridadisaster.org for any information about shelters, road closures, and evacuation routes. In terms of the preparedness of the U.S. government, especially Donald Trump, this is probably the second biggest natural disaster he's dealing with after Hurricane Harvey. Let's talk about the response. We saw many of the previous U.S. presidents just a day or two ago, Barack Obama, George Bush Sr. and Jr., Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, really sending a message to people in terms of helping the victims. How much has Donald Trump, has he done enough, in your opinion, in dealing with natural disasters? Of course, Irma being his second one.
Well, I think in terms of the immediate weather phenomenon, the immediate story of these hurricanes, Donald Trump has been a voice of reason, maybe not all that timely in the case of Hurricane Harvey, but he's issuing these warnings, which is a very constructive, very positive thing to do. But, I have the very same impression as, in the previous comments regarding the governor.
Right.
They apply equally and even more so to Donald Trump. He has been one of the leaders in the climate change denial industry. And I think it's the epitome of irresponsibility to the generations now up and coming, as well as the adults, but the children and grandchildren of this time and their children are really going to feel the impacts of many, many very large hurricanes as well as wildfires. We don't even get the story in the national and international media about a terrible wildfire season hitting the northwestern quarter of the North American continent. It's just climate disaster after disaster, weather disaster after disaster, and climate change is definitely playing a role. It's not the whole story, but it's a significant part of the story of this extremely bizarre weather that people in every corner of the globe are feeling in one way or another. These hurricanes are just examples.
Absolutely. In fact, U.S. President Donald Trump not too long ago talked about this and talked about the immediate need for people to take shelter and evacuate if they are, in fact, in the direct path of Irma. Let's listen in.
My fellow Americans, as Hurricane Irma approaches, my administration is working closely with our state and local partners to help save lives, protect families, and assist those in need. This is a storm of absolutely historic, destructive potential. I ask everyone in the storm's path to be vigilant and to heed all recommendations from government officials and law enforcement. Nothing is more important than the safety and security of our people. We are doing everything we can to help with disaster preparations, and when the time comes, we will restore, recover, and rebuild together as Americans. In times such as these, we see the strength and the resolve of the American spirit, and we see the kindness and courage of our people. With gratitude for our first responders and prayers for those in the storm's path, America stands united, and I mean totally united. From Texas to Louisiana, from Florida to Puerto Rico, and always the U.S. Virgin Islands and everywhere in between that has been affected by these terrible storms, we will endure and come back stronger than ever before.
All right, let's bring in our guest back into the conversation. Stephen, let me continue with you with regards to this. When it comes to this, FEMA and some of the other federal agencies really do have to step up and offer help. But is there something that people could do so that they don't need to perhaps rely on the government assistance? I mean, obviously, depending on the extent of damage that Irma does, what are some things that people could do if they are either evacuating or if they decide to stay back, especially with a hurricane of this size?
Well, first, not to avoid your question, but I want to absolutely echo and reinforce what the professor said about the irresponsibility of President Trump, regardless of the nice statements he's making now, which are positive. His irresponsibility in dealing with and denying the problem and the challenge of climate change. This is not just affecting the U.S. This will affect millions and millions of people in India and the rest of the world. The lack of action we're taking now. To get back to your question, if people are staying in place, I don't want to seem flippant about this, but they should pray or hope for the best, because a lot of them who are staying in place are making, in parts of Florida, are making what seems to, according to all the experts, to be the wrong choice in terms of what Americans are doing otherwise. We make donations to various organizations that provide relief. There's been some controversy about whether donations to our American Red Cross are really worthwhile in terms of its performance in terms of disasters. But there are lots of organizations and causes they could donate to. And in terms of people on the ground, be it in Florida in the coming days or people who were in Texas, there may be many instances of their being able to render, once they return to their homes, individual assistance to each other, as people are often prone to do, bringing out the best of people sometimes when such natural disasters occur.
Absolutely. Very interesting dynamic there in terms of the statements that U.S. President Donald Trump makes as opposed to some of the policies he does believe when it comes to climate change. Jeffrey, let me ask you as well as a follow-up on that question. I mean, this really is a true test on a president who has stepped away from any kind of a deal, the Paris Accord, of course, in terms of climate change. And kind of interesting now, dealing with Harvey and now Irma, which is about to make landfall in Florida. I mean, is this sort of an embarrassment, perhaps, for the Trump administration, and not that there haven't been plenty of others in the past?
Well, I think it obviously is. But, the peculiar thing is I really doubt that President Trump feels the embarrassment. I think he's just totally ignorant of the reality of climate change, the causes of climate change, and the consequences of climate change. His view is, warn people about this weather disaster, which is all very, very appropriate and positive. That was really a great set of comments he made. He's got a great speechwriter for that, and I'm sure that those comments are also heartfelt and certainly warranted by the weather conditions on the ground and at sea. But I think he just plainly does not get it when it comes to climate change. He thinks it's some kind of hoax. He's bought into and propagated this incredibly naive and ignorant view that that climate change is some sort of hoax, whether a foreign hoax or some other kind of liberal conspiracy. It's just the reality that you put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere,
right?
And they heat up the atmosphere and the sea surface, and so you get more powerful hurricanes, among many other extreme weather disturbances.
Absolutely. All right, let me see if we can bring in Heathel back into the conversation. Heathel, I know you were there on the ground in Florida. You're in Jacksonville. Over the last few days since Wednesday, Irma has battered many parts of the Caribbean: Antigua, Barbuda, St. Martin, some of the other U.S. Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. Then on Thursday, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Turks and Caicos, Friday, Bahamas and Cuba, and now Irma on its way to Florida. No word yet on the path it'll take, but just by looking at some of those NASA images, I mean, so huge, much bigger than the state of Florida itself. The biggest question that we're seeing is, should people leave or not? That is the biggest question we're seeing. We're seeing reports on social media, people saying, hey, I have relatives in Miami or Tampa or Tallahassee or Gainesville or Jacksonville, but I'm not sure if they should stay put or if they should try to leave or fly out or drive out or whatever. I mean, what is the local media in Florida saying, especially where you are in Jacksonville? Are there certain pockets, Heathel, that are leaving, like Miami and the Keys, but the other parts perhaps staying put? What's the situation like there on the ground there, Heathel?
Yeah, this is where I'm at right now, where I'm standing, is a mandatory evacuation zone. But just because people are told to leave doesn't mean that they are. If you take a look here at the water, you'll be able to see that there are people still here, and they're just, you can see a man that's tying up a little boat there on the water, kind of these last-minute preps that people do right before the storm comes. And a lot of people that are in mandatory evacuation areas on the beach, they have left. They've taken the warnings very seriously. But you can see, even though the winds are really high right now, this isn't because of Irma, everybody. This is actually just some storms that are off the coast. So, but it's good in a way, because people are usually, before you get a hurricane, the weather's really, really nice. And so people feel like, oh, it's going to be fine, and they don't really take it seriously. One thing here is that people have been taking this storm seriously from the get-go, from Monday. They have been watching it. They've been taking evacuation orders very seriously. In fact,
right.
A lot of people were leaving on the roads on Tuesday and Wednesday. That's when we saw a lot of the traffic. So right now, a lot of the roads are empty. But the people that have decided to stay, all these homes right here, these are all in evacuation zones. And you can see why, because they are right on the water. And that water, before the hurricane's even here, is already coming up. This is the St. Johns River. So folks are worried about flooding, but the other part that we're worried about are tornadoes, and that's a little bit less predictable. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens as this storm is moving west.
Let me also ask you, in terms of those who decide to ride the storm through, whether it's Tampa or Jacksonville or Tallahassee or even Miami, where, of course, that probably will be the first city in Florida that'll be hit. What are things that people can do at home? Those who have perhaps relatives or people who are sort of, going to ride the storm out. What are some tips that you are offering or letting people know in terms of the people in the state that they should absolutely do? Charging their phones, perhaps getting supplies, battering up their windows and doors. Some tips that really could save their lives.
Well, it's interesting because we tell people have your emergency kit ready, have your extra batteries, your flashlight. We tell people make sure you have enough water for 3 days. Make sure you have enough food for 3 days because that's the amount of time we expect power outages. But for folks in Miami and folks in the Keys, none of that is going to help them. They just have to get out. They have shelter set up. So my advice to those folks right now would be get yourself to a shelter. People board up and people prepare as much as they can. But this is not like your normal storm. A Category 4, which may even become a Category 5 again, is no joke. And people always think, well, Hurricane Andrew was bad, but it just skirted the tip of Homestead and South Florida. This is actually coming all the way up the state. I have lived here my whole life. I've never seen a hurricane like this. And Floridians, we tend to kind of be complacent when we see a hurricane because, 2004, I was here, we had 4 hurricanes that were supposed to hit us and, kind of skirted along. And we all think, oh, well, I survived those. No, not this time around. People are taking these warnings very, very seriously. We're under a hurricane warning here right now. And kind of a funny Indiana connection. You were talking about preparing. I want to introduce you to my fiance, who's actually here. Say hi, Tanmay.
Hi, guys.
He actually came in from India like 5 days ago. Survived all of that heavy flooding that they had in Gujarat, and then he came here and went, how the heck are we supposed to prepare for a hurricane? So what have you been doing to get ready?
I've just been packing and then repacking.
Yeah, I think both of us have kind of gone, okay, what do we need? What's our plan? What's our backup plan? And I think it is a little scary, right? Just to give somebody perspective from someone who's, lived in D.C., but now you're in Florida. What is it like?
This is pretty intense. This is really intense. It's really windy. It's if you can see the skies, it's like the clouds are moving super fast, and like the water looks like it's coming up pretty quick. This is definitely intense compared to DC.
Oh God.
Well, I think for people that are not used to preparing for a hurricane, and you see pictures of what happened like during Harvey, you think to yourself, a couple of canned food and can opener and some bottled water is not going to do me any good. I need to probably get out of here.
Right.
And that's what people are realizing.
Oh my God, it is certainly scary, but we wish all of you guys very safe in Florida. Heathel, thank you so much, as well as to your fiance for chiming in, plus all of our guests, Stephen Golub and Jeffrey. We appreciate that. Of course, we will be tracking this storm and bring you the very latest. Unfortunately, we are out of time here on Wion World is One News. That does it for this special report and bulletin. I'm Archit Seshadri. More news and updates continue on the other side, but for now, good night.